Hey guys, it is Spooks here. I'm going to have a bit of a channel update after the story to let you guys know what's going on. I didn't want to make it into its own video, like a channel update video, so if you guys are interested in finding out a little bit more of kind of what's going on, then stay tuned after the story, and I hope you enjoy. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god. Was the only thing Savannah could say as she and Bailey sped away from the scene of the crime. Calm down, Bailey said. It's going to be okay. Listen, we never gave the cop our names. It's not like he called in to check our names out or anything. No one else was around back there and saw what happened. Eventually, the other cops are going to notice that guy is not responding to them. They're eventually going to find him, but there's nothing that ties us to his murder. We're going to get rid of the gun, hide the money somewhere, and then ditch the car. They're going to be out looking for some hardened criminal, not a couple of minors. We're going to be just fine. And we still have the money. Things are going to be okay, I promise. Just please take some deep breaths and calm down. Savannah began trying to just focus on her breathing as she was beginning to hyperventilate. She really did love Bailey, but what he did horrified her. When he killed Gerald, that was different. She knew that man was going to do awful things to her. And Bailey saved her. Plus, that guy turned out to be even more of a monster than she originally thought. But this was different. That police officer was doing nothing wrong. He was just doing his job, and he got killed for it. These thoughts kept running through Savannah's mind. What if he was married? What if he had kids? Meanwhile, Bailey was continuing to explain to her that things were going to be okay, but she couldn't hear a word he was saying. It took the entire drive for Savannah to finally recover from her hysterical state. Once Bailey parked the car, they were deep into the woods. Savannah hadn't been able to pay attention to where they went, but they were somewhere she had never been before. "Wait here, I'll be right back," Bailey said as he got out of the car. 10 long minutes later, he finally returned. "Where did you go?" Savannah asked. "I had to make sure no one will ever find the gun," he replied. They began driving again. And from what Savannah could tell, Bailey really did seem to have a plan. Even though she knew she was wrong, she still justified Bailey's actions. She told herself that he just panicked in the heat of the moment, and that he was a good person that just made a mistake. She forced herself to believe him when he told her that they weren't going to be in any trouble, and that he was still going to get a job, and that they would use the money from the bank to get a home together. They continued driving, and Bailey continued making these promises, and against her better judgment, her naive young mind believed every word of it. They eventually made it back closer to their hometown. Bailey drove up and down side streets located just several miles from where they lived. "What are we doing?" asked Savannah. "Right now, we're just looking for something," he replied. She didn't question him any further. And after about 10 more minutes of driving up and down these roads, Bailey slowly came to a stop. "Wait here for just a second," he said, as he got out of the car. He quickly began walking through someone's front yard, continually looking to his left and right to ensure he wasn't being watched. He walked into the garage on the property and grabbed a shovel out of it as quietly as possible. Halfway running, he made his way back to the car, threw the shovel in the back seat, and sped off as quickly as possible. The two made their way to the woods nearest to where they lived. Bailey grabbed the shovel and instructed Savannah to grab the backpack of money. Savannah followed Bailey as they walked through the woods. They used things that stuck out to them, like a large fallen tree, as a way to memorize the path they took. They hiked about a mile into the seclusion of the thick woods and settled on a spot to quickly bury the majority of their take from the robbery. Savannah looked up as they made their way back to the car, noticing the orange and pink sky filtering in through the trees. "We need to get back to the house soon," she said. "We will, we're almost done," replied Bailey. Once in the car, they drove to their final destination before going home, which was a secluded lot about a half-mile from their house. They wiped down every part of the car they believed they may have touched in order to remove any fingerprints, and then simply walked home. With minutes left to spare, they made it home before curfew, and managed to stay underneath Meredith's radar. Bailey was able to convince both Savannah and himself that there was absolutely nothing that could tie either of them back to what they had done that day. Savannah lied in bed that night, as her mind shot around to any and all small things that could lead to her and Bailey getting caught for their crimes. One moment, she was in fear of picturing herself in prison. The next, she was feeling sorrow for the police officer. She went from emotion to emotion until the exhaustion of the day finally gained control and she managed to fall asleep. "Are you Savannah?" was the first thing she heard as she awoke the next morning. She looked around to find the source of the question and was horrified to have her eyes come to focus on a police officer. Before she knew it, she was surrounded by several officers. Meredith was behind them, outraged, asking them what they wanted and trying to defend Savannah. "Do you know why we're here?" the officer asked Savannah, and she answered them truthfully by saying no. She really didn't know why they were there. Was it the car they stolen? Or the bank they robbed? Or most importantly, the officer that Bailey shot? Or could it have even been related to the killing of Gerald? The officer replied to Savannah as the other officers dragged her out of bed. "You're under arrest for the attempted murder of a police officer and grand theft auto." Savannah was both terrified and humiliated as the officers read her rights to her as they handcuffed her while she stood in nothing more than underwear and a t-shirt. Savannah was crying and a bit emotionally hysterical, but she complied with everything the officers demanded. They were kind enough to help her put her pants and shoes on before they escorted her down to their car. Once she was outside, she saw that there were actually several police cars outside and even more officers too. Suddenly, she noticed a figure in the back of one of the cars. It was Bailey. He looked over and they made eye contact for only a moment, and then the car he was in began to drive away, and the next thing she knew, he was out of her life. Savannah was also placed in the back of a car, where she sat waiting by herself on the hard plastic seat. Eventually, she was transported to the county jail, which is where she found out that she was being charged as an adult for the crimes she was accused of. She was terrified and absolutely devastated, but also confused. She sat in a holding cell, waiting to be booked into the jail, and just thought about everything. She did find a small amount of happiness, knowing that the officer wasn't killed, or else the charge wouldn't be attempted murder. She saw a pool of blood collecting around the officer's head after Bailey shot him, but somehow he survived. She wondered if he was a vegetable or was going to have any other permanent injuries. For hours, she waited, stuck in a small cell and in her own mind. She managed to make the worst of a terrible situation, as she tortured herself the entire time, thinking back on everything, wishing she had made different decisions, wishing things were so different. She pictured her life with Bailey as she wished so desperately she could see him, the life that would surely never happen. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she heard the lock on her door unlatch. They called her name, and she followed the CO to a desk. She gave them her name and fingerprints. They took her photo, and because she was charged with felonies, they also took her DNA. They made her shower in front of a female CO, and she was further humiliated when the CO had to check her to make sure she wasn't bringing anything into the jail. She got dressed and was moved into a cell within the jail, where she would stay until she was arraigned. There was one other woman in her cell. She was an older woman and didn't seem interested in talking, which was perfect for Savannah. The bed was horribly uncomfortable, but all she wanted to do was sleep. It was late at this point due to sitting in the holding cell for so many hours. She was offered a leftover dinner tray, but declined it after taking one quick look at it. She lied down and tried finding a comfortable position to sleep in. She closed her eyes, and the fear flooded back in. She suddenly thought back to Gerald. They now have her DNA. Yes, Bailey set the man on fire, but what if they still found her DNA on him, or even found it somewhere in the surrounding area? She eventually convinced herself that worrying did nothing to help her, and figured out a way to fall asleep. In the morning, she was woken up to what sounded like a zoo. Tons and tons of chatter coming from all directions. She waited quietly in her cell, and eventually she heard her name called. She was escorted through the jail into a room where she would be arraigned. She sat in front of a camera and corresponded with the judge via video. She pled not guilty to the judge and asked to have an attorney appointed to her. She tried pleading with the judge that she didn't actually do anything and just followed along with Bailey, but the judge shut her down and told her to save it for the future court proceedings. The judge showed no mercy due to a police officer being the victim and set her bail at $500,000. At that point, Savannah came to the realization that she wasn't getting out of jail anytime soon. She was eventually brought back to her cell and just sat there, with nothing to do and nowhere to go. Time went by that first day dreadfully slow. The inmates were let out of their cells for lunch and dinner for an hour, where they could eat and gather around each other to watch a small TV. Savannah tried picking at the trays of food brought for them, but the meals were vile at best. The next morning, she woke up early before everyone else, and for just a split second, forgot where she was at. She tried holding on to that split second of time once the harsh reality of her situation came flooding back in. She spent all morning basically counting the seconds as they went by, and doing her best to take herself somewhere else in her mind. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Savannah was lying in her bunk, continuing to pass the time, and then she heard her name called. Her first pretrial wasn't for a couple of weeks, so she had no idea what this was about. The corrections officer came and got her from her cell and began leading her out of the pod. She asked what this was about, and the CO told her they didn't know. She was brought through the jail into more of a normal-looking room. The CO handcuffed her to the table in the room and shut the door. Savannah was trying to figure out what was going on, but the room didn't even have windows. About 20 minutes later, 3 men walked in. They all looked to be some type of professionals and were all dressed in suits. The men introduced themselves to her. The man that sat next to her ended up being her attorney, and the 2 that sat across the table from them were investigators. The men didn't beat around the bush. They were very direct after the introductions. One of the investigators started immediately by saying, "I know how scary this must be for you, Savannah. You've been through a lot lately. We've talked to your friend Bailey, and we believe we've come up with a solution. We know that Bailey stole the gun he used to shoot Officer Brendan. We know that he also stole the car, and we know that he is the one that shot Officer Brendan. Luckily, somehow, the bullet nearly missed him completely, and only left him with a small fracture in his skull and a pretty nasty laceration that required stitches, but he's expected to make a full recovery. It's shocking to think that 2 juveniles did this, and it's shocking to wonder what would have happened if that bullet hadn't knocked Officer Brendan out. Maybe he would have ended up dead, or maybe the 2 of you would have. It's a miracle this situation didn't end worse. But to get to the point, we already know about the gun, and the car, and the assault, so there's no reason to lie or deny any of it. Immediately after the assault, we pulled Officer Brendan's dashcam footage. When we figured out what town the car Bailey stole was from by running the plates, we contacted the police there. They recognized Bailey right away, and when we found out where he lived and pulled the files of all his foster siblings, boom, there you are. I don't know if you guys thought you had gotten away with anything, but we figured this thing out after about 20 minutes of investigating. Anyway, your friend Bailey admitted to us that he was responsible for everything, and that you didn't even know he had stolen a gun. He told us when he picked you up, he told you he had borrowed the car and that you didn't know it was stolen. And most importantly, he told us you had no idea he was going to try to murder a cop. And I don't care if any of that is true or not, but I'm going to offer you a deal, and it's a one-time deal. Bailey's attorney is naturally having him plead not guilty to all the charges, and of course, is trying to work out the best deal possible he can for his client. But Bailey has admitted to us what he's done, and said that you're not involved. However, you were there when he shot Officer Brendan, and you were inside the stolen vehicle. In order for this to go smoothly, we need you to testify against Bailey that he was in fact the one driving the car and he was the one who shot Officer Brendan. In exchange for your written testimony, we drop your charges down to disorderly conduct, and you'll be ordered to get an evaluation by a psychologist, and then possibly start seeing them on a regular basis, depending on their professional opinion. We've talked to Bailey about this, and he wants you to take this deal. He actually told me to tell you that you need to take this deal. So, all you'll be doing is helping to speed things up, and if you sign your name, you go home today. At this point, Savannah's attorney presented her with a sheet of paper and said, "Savannah, as your attorney, I strongly advise you to take this deal. These charges will ruin your life if you don't. This is absolutely the best thing for you. I've actually typed up your testimony for you. You just need to go ahead and sign your name at the bottom. Read it over, it's only what we just discussed." Savannah was stunned. The prospect of being able to leave this miserable place and just be free was something she definitely didn't want to pass up. But she would have stayed in there for Bailey's sake. But if Bailey wants her to take this deal, then that's what she's going to do. She barely skimmed over the paper and signed her name. Her attorney handed the paper to the investigators, at which point they stood up, shook hands, and left. Savannah's attorney then stood up, shook her hand, and told her good luck. Minutes later, a CO showed up to the room and escorted her back to her cell. She asked him when she could leave, and he told her whenever they brought the paperwork. For the first time in days, Savannah felt something other than misery. She was excited, and happy, and hopeful for the future. She vowed that she would do anything she had to in order to create a life for she and Bailey, and that she would wait for him to get out of jail. She sat in her cell, anticipating her release, and becoming excited every time the door to the pod opened, hoping it was for her. And then she thought of something. The money. They never mentioned anything about the money or the bank. Holy shit, she thought. They don't know it was us. Her heart began pounding. She had been thinking of where she could get a job when she turned 16, but now she'll have a head start. She won't have to panic or scramble around in order to come up with a plan and provide a home for herself. Sure, she could stay at the foster home until she was 18, but she wanted to set up a home that Bailey could come home to once he was released. Now, her thoughts went to how she was going to spend the money. She knew there must have been at least a couple $1,000s, enough to find an apartment and maybe get some furniture and a few other necessities. She would worry about finding a job once she had everything set up. Hours went by, but finally, she heard her name called. She was brought to a room where she could change back into her regular clothes and get her belongings. While walking out, they told her that because she was a minor, they couldn't release her without contacting her foster mother first. Savannah gave them the phone number for Meredith, and they told her that they would call her. She honestly wasn't even sure if Meredith would allow her to continue to live at the house at this point, let alone come pick her up. She knew she would be placed somewhere if Meredith said no, but prayed that didn't happen. Minutes later, the CO told her that Meredith said she would come pick her up. That was good news, of course, but she was still quite nervous. Only about 25 minutes later, she saw Meredith pull up and park right outside the front door. They buzzed Meredith in, and Savannah walked over to greet her. Once Meredith saw her, she threw her arms around her and began crying. Savannah had never known up to this point just how much Meredith cared for her, and when all the emotions came flooding through her, she hugged Meredith back and began crying herself. There was a bond formed between them at that moment. On the ride home, Meredith asked her nothing about the charges, but instead talked about things she would like the two of them to do together. Savannah was extremely happy and relieved that she didn't have to rush to find an apartment. She could take her time and make sure she does everything right. When she got home, she happily ate, showered, and then finally slept in her own bed. The following morning, the first thing she did upon waking up was calling around, trying to see how she could get in contact with Bailey. She wanted to know about phone calls and visits. She wanted to talk to Bailey and get his input on how she should prepare for their lives together. One of the investigators had given her his card, so she called him. He seemed a bit caught off guard, but told her he would look into it and someone would get back to her. So again, she began waiting for something. She didn't want to leave the house until she got the phone call back. Unfortunately, up to this point, she didn't have her own cell phone. But that would change as soon as she got the money. She would make sure that no matter where she was, Bailey could call her anytime. It wasn't until late afternoon that she finally got the call. It was the same investigator she had called in the morning. She answered the phone with such excitement and anticipation, even wondering if there was a way she could talk to Bailey that same day. But her excitement soon turned to severe disappointment and turmoil. The investigator told her that he went out of his way to get in contact with Bailey, and that Bailey said he didn't want to be in contact with her. He said he wasn't going to call her, and that he didn't want her to write him. He also said that if and when he's released from prison, that he doesn't want her in his life whatsoever. And finally, that they're just bad for each other, and wishes her good luck in life. Savannah was absolutely devastated. "Look," he replied, "I'm just relaying to you what he said. I know your feelings are probably hurt, but the kid said his mind is made up. Don't worry, you're young, and you got out of this basically completely free and clear. And well, for him, when it comes to the attempted murder of a cop, he won't ever be getting out anyway." Savannah was both stunned and horrified. "What about my statement speeding things up and his attorney making a deal?" she asked. Look, Savannah, there's always the plan, but sometimes people don't come to an agreement, and the DA is pushing this case way harder than we expected. I don't know what else to tell you. I'm sorry for the bad news, but hey, I'm really busy right now, so, keep your chin up." And then he hung up the phone, and that was it. Savannah felt like her life had just ended. The one person she had that really meant something to her was going to be locked away from her for the rest of his life. And even if he's not, even if he does end up getting out somehow, he wanted nothing to do with her. She thought about all the planning she was doing, all the journaling and note-taking she did to set up the perfect life for them. Everything was being planned around making him happy and making his life perfect. Meanwhile, he's sitting there wanting nothing to do with her. She felt so dumb and clueless and empty. She thought about the money. She still had enough daylight to go dig it up. They had hid the shovel not far from where they buried the money, and it wasn't buried too deep even if she couldn't find it. She got her shoes on and began speed walking in the direction of the forest to go retrieve it. It took her a little extra time of walking back and forth, but she eventually was able to find both the shovel and the spot where the money was buried. 5 minutes of digging later, and she was brushing off the dirt of the backpack full of money. Now, she just needed to casually walk home with it and get it into her bedroom without anyone asking her about it. Luckily for her, she was a pro at going unnoticed. Once she made it home, she was able to get into her room without anyone stopping her. It took her longer to count the money than she expected, and there was a reason for it. $7,980. The bag contained $7,980, much more than she had initially anticipated. She sat there in shock for a moment, and then quickly hid all of the money. Just having that kind of money made her feel rich. She had never seen anything like it, and it gave her a high, just knowing it was there. And with the anger she had towards Bailey, it also gave her satisfaction knowing that she was keeping it all for herself and wouldn't be sending him a dime. Somehow, the police never seemed to piece things together fully and never accused Savannah or Bailey of robbing the bank. This could be due to them believing it was someone else, or just never having the evidence to pursue charges. Regardless, Savannah knew that she was lucky and that she couldn't do anything to draw suspicion to herself. After turning 16 years old, Savannah got a job. She became a server at a local restaurant. She hated the job, mostly having to deal with people, but she made good money from it. Although she welcomed any extra money, the job was something that she intended to keep only temporarily, as nothing more than a cover for the money from the bank robbery. If she were suddenly to buy a car and move into an apartment, it would look very suspicious. No 16-year-old orphan without a job suddenly comes up with that kind of money. At least not without some people asking a few questions. It was at this time she also applied to be emancipated, which would basically make her an adult, capable of living on her own. Over the next few months, she focused on work and getting her application approved. It was easier for her to make this happen than it would be for someone living with their natural parents. Although Meredith was sad to see her leave, she understood why she wanted to get on with her life, especially after what happened with Bailey. Meredith did not put up a fight against Savannah, and only had good things to say about her, and eventually, Savannah's request was approved. Meredith told Savannah to take her time and make sure she had as much money saved up as she would need before she moved out. Savannah thanked her, but didn't waste any time, as she now had well over $10,000 total between working and the robbery. She immediately began looking around, and once she found a place she loved, she took it. The landlord was hesitant to give her the apartment, but with Savannah offering to pay for an extra couple months of rent up front and waving all the cash around to do so, she ended up with the keys. After moving in and finding a half-decent car, she found herself happy again. Aside from work, she was able to come home to a place that didn't have a half dozen or more people running around, and she loved it. The first part of her plan couldn't have worked out any better. Now it was just time to quit her job. She figured as long as she paid her rent on time, she would stay under everyone's radar. She also figured that she had enough money to pay rent and her other bills for several months. This gave her plenty of time to find another job, a job that didn't deal with so many people. Now having a car, this greatly expanded her options too. After quitting her serving job, Savannah sat at home by herself, all day and night, aside from having to run errands now and then. It was exactly what she wanted. But after a couple weeks, she actually found herself becoming rather lonely. As more time went on, she was running out of money. She eventually got online and started looking for a job. In her spare time, she also began talking to guys online, picturing herself one day filling the void that was left when she was separated from Bailey. She was scared of being hurt again, but the idea of having that feeling back, the one that Bailey gave her, pushed her to keep looking. With the good looks she had, it didn't take long at all for her to begin receiving messages from all sorts of guys. She was looking to find someone she could connect to on an emotional level, similar to what she had with Bailey. So all the guys that sent her messages like, "Hey hottie," or "Wanna hook up?" went ignored. But there was one guy that stood out from the rest. His name was Oliver, and like many others, he sent her a message. But unlike the others, his message consisted of, "Hi, my name is Oliver. I came across your profile and felt compelled to message you. If you would ever like to talk, feel free to message me back." He didn't come across like an idiot, which was refreshing to Savannah. She decided to look at his profile after reading the message, and continued to become more and more interested in him. He was a good-looking guy, and from what she could tell, it looked like he worked in some form of healthcare, which for some reason made Savannah feel like he was more trustworthy. She waited a day to message him back, just so she didn't look desperate. They ended up hitting it off, and as time went on, they began talking all the time. Savannah found out that he was 20 years old, but the two agreed that the age difference wasn't too big or any type of problem. Oliver had just started nursing school, and was currently working at a hospital as a nursing assistant. He made decent money and still lived with his parents, which allowed him to save quite a bit. The two ended up meeting up, and things went just as they're supposed to. From a nerve-wracking first date, to an awkward first kiss, to them hanging out on almost a daily basis. After dating for a couple months, Savannah ended up telling Oliver about her financial situation. He had already known she was living off some money she had saved, but he didn't know much else aside from that. She informed him that she needed to get a job in order to continue paying her bills. Because she didn't have a ton of work experience, she asked Oliver for advice on how she would go about finding decent work. When faced with this question, he replied with an idea that took Savannah by surprise. He suggested that he move in with her. He went on to tell her that it made the most sense. If she were to get a job and they were both working, they would never see each other. He said that he made enough money to pay the bills, and once he finished school, he would begin making enough money for them to get a new place together. It didn't take much to convince Savannah that this was a good idea. She was basically sold on it as soon as he first brought it up. And the next thing she knew, Oliver was moved in. It went well, and the two almost always got along perfectly. As time went on, they began getting more serious and started discussing the future. Oliver assured Savannah that he could support the two, and that things would only keep getting better for them as time went on. And for quite a period of time, that's exactly what happened. For the next 2 years, their relationship continued to grow. Shortly after Savannah turned 18, Oliver completed nursing school. The hospital he was employed at promoted him, and his new nursing license literally doubled his pay. It was at this point that the two began speaking of getting married. They were able to spend more time together now that Oliver wasn't at school anymore or busy studying. They started saving money quickly with so much extra coming in, and things felt perfect for Savannah. She had filled that void in a way she couldn't have even imagined. And being a stay-at-home wife was the perfect career for her. Everything finally fell into place for her. And the two lived happily ever after. Well, for a while. As you can imagine, no couple has a relationship that's flawless, and Savannah and Oliver were no exception. There was a young man, just several years older than Savannah, that had been living in the same apartment building as her ever since she first moved in. He went by the name Hopper and happened to be black. Now, Savannah herself felt indifferent when it came to race. She had no problem with a person based on the color of their skin. Oliver, on the other hand, did. He wasn't very outspoken when it came to his racism, but would make enough subtle remarks here and there to get his point across. Savannah just ignored him when he would make these comments, but that's not where the trouble lied. Ever since Hopper first saw Savannah, he began making comments about how attractive he thought she was. On multiple occasions, when he saw her outside, he would ask her to go out with him. At first, she would politely deny his requests, but after so long, she eventually started ignoring him completely. Hopper would make statements about her being stuck up or too good for him. It went on and on over the years. Since Oliver would have to leave so often for work, he eventually grew uncomfortable with the way Hopper would always approach Savannah. It got to the point where he began getting jealous, even though he knew it was irrational. But at times, he seemed to not be able to control his feelings. The problem this caused between he and Savannah was only mild, as he knew realistically he had nothing to worry about. Plus, Savannah didn't want the attention of Hopper. This wasn't her fault. In fact, with the way she was, she didn't want the attention of anyone, aside from Oliver, of course. But once the couple was finally beginning to look around for a more permanent home, that unwanted attention reached Savannah in the worst kind of way. Oliver came home from work one morning, after a long overnight shift, to find Savannah already awake, sitting on the couch crying. "Hey, what's wrong?" he asked, as he walked over to console her. "I need to tell you something. Please don't get mad at me," she replied. Of course not. You can tell me anything." "Okay," she said. "Well, a little over a month ago, I had some trouble sleeping after you had gone to work one night, so I decided to clean up around the apartment a bit. It was around 11 p.m. or so when I was finishing up, and I needed to take the trash out. After throwing it in the dumpster, I was walking back to the building, and I saw him. Hopper. He said something generic to me, and I ignored him like normal. And that made him mad, like way more upset than he's ever acted. But I just kept walking and walked inside. And he followed me in. He grabbed me by my arm and spun me around to face him. He was still shouting at me, and I could smell alcohol on his breath. I was scared, but I just wanted to get inside the apartment, but he wouldn't let me walk away and go upstairs. Instead, he dragged me into the laundry room and shut the door. And that's where he raped me." Oliver went pale. His expression turned into pure dread. "I tried to get away, but he was so much stronger than me. I tried to yell, but he would cover my mouth, and eventually he started choking me. There was nothing I could do. Once he was done, he just got up and left me there.
I crawled up to the apartment and just sat in the shower crying. I didn't call the police because I didn't want to have to talk to all these people. You know how I am. And I just didn't want anyone knowing this happened to me. I feel awful about it. I didn't tell you either because I didn't want you to be mad at me. I just didn't want to lose you. And Ollie, I'm so sorry. But it gets worse. I missed my period. And after waiting and waiting for it, I went out and got a pregnancy test, and it's positive. I'm pregnant. And since you and I always use protection, I just know it has to be. I'm so sorry, Oliver. Please don't be mad at me.
Oliver just stared at her before replying. So all this happened, but you didn't tell anyone. And then you find out you're pregnant, and now all of a sudden you were raped? Savannah looked at him in disbelief. Did he really think she would fabricate something so horrible to cover up a lie? Oliver just stared back at her, with an obvious look of disgust, before turning around and walking out the door. Since Savannah actually was indeed telling the truth, she had to go through the awful process of finding a doctor that could help her terminate the pregnancy. And then, of course, she had to have the actual procedure done, all with no one by her side. At first, she had hoped that Oliver would calm down and come to his senses, but it never happened. Whether it was that he believed that Savannah was lying, or that he just couldn't look at her the same anymore, she never found out. She couldn't help but to also believe that since the guy that did this to her was black, played a role as well. Earlier on, when they started dating, Oliver had managed to ask her if she had ever slept with a black guy, but tried to seem like he was making a joke about it. But regardless of what it was, he was gone. He barely even talked to her after that day. Within 2 days, he had his belongings out of Savannah's apartment. The last she heard about him, he had taken a job at a hospital halfway across the country. So for the third time in her life, she was left alone. She couldn't wrap her mind around being able to just up and leave someone you said you loved and wanted to marry. She was sad and hurt and angry, but also scared. She found out quickly a couple years ago that she didn't like being completely alone. But not only that, she also had to acknowledge the fact that she might end up homeless soon. She had bills coming up, and with Oliver just vanishing the way he did, she had no way of paying them. The little she had in her own bank went to the doctor, and as time went by, anger became the more prominent feeling she carried around. Out of both curiosity and boredom, she ended up making a new profile on the same website she had met Oliver on. Honestly, she wanted to know if he had made a new profile and was already trying to move on. She wasn't able to find him, but she also didn't delete her profile after looking. Instead, she decided to fill out her details in the profile, taking new pictures and all. She considered the fact that Oliver might one day do the same thing as her and look to see if she has a new profile. And that was the main driving force behind all of this effort. Savannah didn't have much in life, but she did at least have her looks. Not only was she a beautiful girl, but she was also the type of person that could eat any way she pleased and never work out, but still retain a flawless figure. And into her adult years, she had also developed quite well. She didn't hesitate to exploit any of her features, and even quicker than before, the messages from guys began coming in. She really wasn't looking for anyone or anything in particular, aside from attention. At least not at first. But the financial strain was wearing down on her, and it didn't take her too long to recognize what kind of guys had money. Out of all the messages she received, these were the guys she would message back. At first, she just began talking to 2 of the guys out of all the messages she received. Based on everything that happened to her, she had truly developed a deep resentment towards men in general, and had a vendetta towards them without even knowing it at first. She allowed the progression of their conversations to rise as quickly as the men wanted, and soon was speaking to each of them on the phone. As they began getting to know each other more, Savannah wasn't looking to fill any type of void anymore. She wasn't interested in establishing any type of emotional connection. She wasn't aware, but what she was really craving
was control and power over men, especially after the way she had been abused on an emotional and physical level. After speaking with the two men for a while, she narrowed her sights on just one. His name was Clark. He was quite a bit older than her at the age of 31, but she told him age didn't matter much to her. Clark was very successful for his age. He owned a company that bought, remodeled, and sold houses, and he had done very well for himself. Although he seemed a bit hesitant when it came to meeting up with Savannah, their relationship through text messages and phone calls continued to grow. They would send each other pictures of themselves regularly, and even video chat now and then. Savannah wanted to meet him, and finally, he asked her to dinner. So, as a bit of a reward for him, she did something she had never done before. With her hair put together, just as well as it would be in any other picture she took, she decided to get undressed from the waist up and deliver Clark a surprise in the form of a picture this way. His response, she knew she had struck some type of special nerve or something. He praised her for sending it, giving her compliments, and basically begging her for more. He sent some unrequested pictures of himself back to her, which were considerably less attractive than what she had sent him. But that wasn't what was important to her. Finally, it was time for their date, and they met up to get dinner. He presented himself just as well in real life as he made himself out to be over the phone. He was a relatively nice guy, and somewhat fun to be around, but it didn't take long for Savannah to realize that he was really only interested in one thing. And while he was in the middle of talking to her towards the end of dinner, she cut him off and asked, "So are you going to ask me to come home with you?" The question clearly caught Clark off guard, but it put a smile on his face as well. "Well, I need to talk to you about that," he said. Here's the thing. I'm still technically married, but my wife and I, we know it's over. We just haven't split up yet. And it's been like this for quite a while. But it would be disrespectful to bring a girl home. Plus, we have a couple young kids. I know I forgot to mention that part, but I feel like it's only fair to tell you. Savannah might have cared about all of this if she was actually interested in Clark. But instead, she responded with, "So I guess it'll be my place." Clark followed Savannah home after paying for their dinner, and you probably know what happened after. This continued for some time. Clark would sneak over to Savannah's whenever possible, and soon she learned his relationship with his wife may not have been like he said it was. One day after he came over, his phone kept ringing and ringing. He eventually excused himself into the other room, and she overheard him talking to his wife, telling her he was stuck at work and promising her that there was nothing going on. He even ended the conversation by telling her he loved her and would be home soon. This made things even better for Savannah in her mind, and she acted like she hadn't heard a word. Eventually, Savannah began acting sad one day after Clark came over and forced herself to fake a cry in front of him. Hey, what is it?" he asked. "I have no way to pay rent. I'm going to get kicked out, and I'm just so sad we might not be able to see each other anymore." She had to force herself not to laugh as she told him about this. Without hesitation, he happily offered to keep her bills paid for her. Honestly, it was almost like indirect prostitution. He gave her money so she could pay her bills, and all the while, he came over only for short periods of time so they could hook up. But eventually, this setup lost the original excitement that Clark once felt, and it became more of a headache for him than anything. And so, he broke it off with Savannah. She didn't really care that she wouldn't be seeing him anymore, but she did care about having money. She was a capable girl, at least capable enough to go get a job, but she was brought up to scheme, and it was basically all she knew. After Clark told her it was over, she said, "So you're just going to take off and leave me to end up on the street?" Look, Savannah, you're a nice girl, but that's just really not my problem." "Okay," she said. "Well, when I call Mary and tell her what's been going on between us, is that going to be your problem?" "Yeah, I got her number out of your phone and heard your conversation with her and read your text messages. When I send her the pictures you sent me, is that going to be your problem?" Clark was dead silent for a moment, and finally replied, "How much? How much is it going to take
for you to leave me and my wife alone." And that was it. She finally had that power and control. Not to mention, also, the money she so desperately needed. And this was the beginning. From this point on, she knew exactly who she was looking for in a guy. His age didn't matter so much, just that he had money and something Savannah could exploit, something he could lose. And, as unfortunate as it is, it wasn't difficult for her to find guys who were willing to put things on the line just to sleep with her. It became her full-time job. Not only did it make her feel powerful, it paid well, very well. So, every time she was done with a guy, it would go something like this. She would put her status on the dating website to available, which would share her profile with men. She would filter through the messages, and she would find a few guys that looked promising. She would then start the vetting process, which involved getting to know the guys well enough to decide if they were worth talking to. She had it down to a science, occasionally dating 2 guys at the same time. Once she found the right guy to talk to, she would solidify the deal by sending them naked pictures of herself. Every time she did this, the guys were all too eager to return the favor. Not only that, they also became more and more desperate to finally meet her. And if the guy broke it off with her, or gave her an issue when it came to money, she would make sure to establish everything she needed well ahead of time to use as blackmail. No one ever saw it coming, which made it that much easier for her to play detective throughout their relationship. She continued this for well over a year. Eventually, she got to a point where she was no longer in need of money, at least not for a while, but yet, she continued on with it. It was just as much, if not more, about the feeling of having power and control as it was about the money anyhow. But things ended up taking a turn for the worse when she met the wrong man. One evening in the fall, Savannah began talking to a man named Brett. He, like all of the others, appeared to be a good candidate. He said all of the right things and had everything going for him that she looked for in a guy. But Brett also had something else, something that she didn't expect. While getting to know Savannah, Brett had randomly stumbled on a post another guy had made on a local dating website. It spoke of Savannah and her routine. It spoke of exactly what she did to guys, and several other men posted anonymously to reaffirm his claims. By the time Brett saw this post, he was in the midst of developing feelings for Savannah. He truly was separated from his wife. It wasn't just something he claimed. It was a messy divorce that was being dragged on, and he was really in a bad place when it came to his emotional health. Getting to know Savannah made him feel like he could get through it. It made him feel like he had a reason to hold on to some hope. And he was crushed when he found out the bitter truth. It was more than he could bear, and he finally decided he truly had nothing left to live for. As much as he resented his wife, he knew he was partially to blame for their breakup. But when it came to Savannah, he saw nothing but pure evil. So after dating for over a month, he snapped. He and Savannah were all set to meet up on a cold fall night. He had something more sinister planned than just a date, while Savannah remained oblivious, focused only on keeping her scheme going. After all of this time, she still couldn't get over Oliver walking out on her. He was the main driving force behind all of this. And although Savannah wasn't very social, she did have a social media account, one she almost never used. But she still happened to have Oliver on her friends list. She didn't know if he ever logged into his account, but she gladly took the opportunity to brag about her date that night in the fancy restaurant she was going to. That evening finally came along, and Brett picked her up, just as planned. If Savannah wasn't so self-absorbed and stuck in her own thoughts, she might have picked up that there was something seriously off with him that night, but it went completely unnoticed. They barely talked at dinner, and Savannah had no problem with it. Upon leaving, Brett took her by the hand and began leading her to the far end of the parking lot, which was all but abandoned by this point in the night. She gladly played her role as the girlfriend and playfully walked with him. Once they had walked from the parking lot and down a small trail, Savannah began to realize this wasn't just a sporadic, romantic walk that Brett had planned. His demeanor suddenly changed, and at this time, she noticed it. Brett pulled out his phone, opened something up on it, and handed it to Savannah. Her heart dropped once she read what was on the phone. She felt completely exposed and didn't know what to do next. That power and control slipped out of her grasp, and she turned back into that scared young girl. She looked up at Brett, waiting for what he was going to say or do next. "How could you do this to me?" he asked. "You knew how hurt I was from my divorce. You decide to just make an assumption about me and play a game with me? You're just blackmailing guys whenever you want. You are a horrible person. You shattered any part of me that I had left that was human. You brought this on yourself." Savannah started taking steps away from Brett. His hands were shaking as he fumbled a knife he removed from his belt. The knife fell to the ground, and Savannah caught a glimpse of just how serious of a situation she was in. At first, she didn't know if she should run or try to grab the knife herself. She decided running was her best bet, but unfortunately, she didn't make it far. Brett tackled her to the ground. He held her in place while trying to get a hold of the knife. Memories of Gerald and Hopper began running through her mind as she struggled to get away. She began clawing at Brett. She at least wanted his DNA under her fingernails. At that point, he stopped reaching for the knife and began strangling her. She fought at first, but grew weak quickly. Her surroundings began to fade in and out, and she finally accepted her fate. She took in a huge breath of air when she came to, and saw Brett up in front of her. Once she was able to focus her vision, she could see someone was behind him, with their arm wrapped around his neck. Savannah struggled to get up, but didn't have the balance. Before she knew it, Brett was falling down next to her, unconscious. The figure that had choked him out then approached her, and she cowered in fear. "Come on, we need to get you out of here." At that moment, Savannah became fully lucid and aware of her surroundings. She wondered if she was just simply dreaming, but before she could figure out what was going on, everything went to black. When she finally woke up, it took her several moments to realize that she was in the hospital. She was confused and began to investigate her body, trying to determine why she was there. It didn't take long for her to notice the bandaging on her neck and the pain that began radiating from it. She rubbed her eyes, trying to get a grasp on her situation, and thought back to her last memories before she ended up in this bed. "You're awake," she suddenly heard. She then looked over to the voice coming from her left. "Meredith?" Savannah asked. "Yes, the hospital called me. I've been so worried about you. I'm just glad you're safe and going to be okay. I thank God he happened to be there last night. If you hadn't posted where you were going to be on your profile, he wouldn't have been able to find you." "Wait, who?" Savannah asked. "I need to give you something," Meredith said. "This showed up in my mailbox a few weeks ago. I didn't know how to reach you, or else I would have given it to you sooner." Meredith retrieved an envelope out of her purse and handed it to Savannah. Within the envelope was a letter. It read, "Dear Savannah, I wish I could have written you sooner. Due to the fact that I assaulted a member of law enforcement, the prosecutors did everything they could to really hammer me down. Up until just a couple days ago, I've been kept in solitary confinement, unable to contact anyone on the outside. It's been horrible in here, but I finally have a small glimmer of hope. If nothing else, I'm at least out of the hole and able to write you. I'm not sure where you're at or if this letter will ever reach you, but I have to try. I ended up being found guilty of aggravated assault on a police officer. The charge was dropped down from attempted murder due to the fact that the officer's dash cam clearly showed the gun went off by accident. I had it in my hand and tried to run. At the same time, the officer was grabbing for the gun, and it just went off. Regardless, it was a horrible thing, and I never meant for things like that to happen. I recently began the process of filing an appeal against my case. While my attorney began to review the evidence again, he came across something he hadn't seen before. It was a tape of your interrogation with the prosecutors and your attorney. I never said those horrible things about you. Since I've been in here, I've wanted nothing more than to talk to you. They didn't want you coming into court. They didn't want any type of eyewitness, as they were originally trying to pin the attempted murder charge on me. It didn't work anyway, and what's ironic is that the tape might actually help me. My attorney said it's proof of the prosecutors intimidating a witness.
They scared you into signing that paper and told you that I said awful things about you so you wouldn't try to contact me. They even put me into solitary confinement so I couldn't reach out to you. But after the discovery of this tape, everything is starting to unwind. My attorney is going to try to get my case to be declared a mistrial over this, or at least make a deal so that I can have an early release on parole. I don't know if it will work, but if it does, I promise you, regardless of where you're at, I'll find you. I won't stop looking for you, and once we're together again, I'll give you the life I promised you. I hope you're happy and doing well, and I long to see you again. Forever yours, Bailey. Savannah's hands began to quiver, and she looked over at Meredith. I don't understand, she said. I believe everything happens for a reason, Meredith said. It just happened to be that he came looking for you that night. He saved you from that man. But not before he came after you guys, one more time with the knife. He got you two away from him, though, and you're both going to be okay. He saved your life. I'm confused, Savannah said. So, wait, are you saying that... Oh my god, I need to see him. Tell him I said thank you, and that I love him, please. How about you tell me yourself, said Bailey, as he walked into the room. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the story. I just want to let you know what's going on. First and foremost, until I actually have a story in my hands, I am no longer going to promise it to you guys on any certain day. So I apologize that this stuff is coming out a little bit late, but there are some issues that are actually being resolved right now. One of them was from a technical standpoint. The computer I was using just really was making it extremely difficult to get anything done. And today I am getting a new one, so that should make a huge difference. There's a couple other things going on in the background, but basically everything I have to say about the channel as of right now is good news. Things are looking, better and better for it. You guys are amazing, and I love you, and the support has been great. I really could not hope for more than what I've been given from you guys. So if, I'm really going to make a couple things different and strive to make some great improvements with the channel. So if you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, comment, share it if you want to, any of that good stuff. That really does help support the channel overall. And thank you guys again so much. I appreciate your patience. Things should be a lot more smoother from now on, and I should be coming out with content a lot more often. I'm really excited, not only about just getting some new equipment, but what the channel is going to be able to do from here on out. So thank you guys again for sticking by me and for waiting on me. And I'm sorry things came out late, but that shouldn't be so much of an issue in the future. And just again, thank you guys.